Chevron it is. So not an earnings report because Chevron has reported earnings this week, but it hasn't actually reported earnings yet, by which I mean it's the 26th of January, and I think they report tomorrow morning.
After the bell.
Oh, after the bell.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think it's after the bell, yeah.
But in advance of that, they have announced... it is as well. They've announced an increase in their dividend and a massive buyback thing. That was overnight, kind of Wednesday night UK time. So they said they're going to buy back from April with no specified timeline for finishing this 75 billion of their own stock. At the time they announced this, they had a market cap of, I think, around 350 billion, so about 20% of their outstanding stock at that stage, and they were hiking their dividend as well by around 6% per share. So a few things to think about here. That took them to, before today's movement, stock is obviously up a bit, about a 3.2% dividend yield. So it's not where it was during the kind of COVID times where people were saying, and I think correctly, either that dividend is getting cut or this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in Chevron. And I think most people were leaning towards cut, and they would have been wrong, I think, in that situation. But Chevron's an interesting kind of operation. I was looking at it a bit today, so I was trying to work out whether I'm interested in this and what I think of buying back that much stock at that price. Do you have a reaction at all?
I think their price is too inflated at the moment, and I think it's an ill-timed buyback, but I couldn't tell you the details why, but that's the first thought that goes through my head.
My initial thought was that this is kind of gross. It's a hell of a lot of money to be spending on a buyback of this kind of sorts, and kind of like you're thinking to yourself, surely you must have something better to do with this kind of money. I would have liked to have seen Chevron. I don't mind them doing a buyback per se, but to buy back 20% of your stock in what seems like it's probably going to be a year, it just seems kind of gross to me. But then I suppose it's no different to a special dividend. This must be the biggest buyback ever announced. I don't think I've ever seen anything of this kind of scale. And yet I didn't realise Chevron was as big as it was, because when I saw the buyback was 75 billion, I thought they must be nearly taking themselves private. But like you say, it's 20% of the company, whilst still a lot. It's kind of incredible. I just makes you think, like, even in the face of some pretty poor oil prices, there's going to be a hell of a lot of buying pressure from inside of Chevron this year. So I hate to say it, but it's almost like you can't lose.
Chevron-wise, are they putting much capex into renewable and stuff like that? Because that's the thing that's taking the capex. It's taking the earnings and the cash flow from Shell and BP in total. They're all trying to do this renewable thing, but I think Chevron, while it's what's the other one, Exxon as well, they're two American oil companies, and they don't seem to want. They've basically put a middle finger up still to renewable energy, so I don't think they are putting the capex in, and they're just reaping the rewards. It might be a very good long-term sort of play. I mean, very, very long-term, it means that they're eventually just going to fall apart, aren't they? But short to medium term, it's very strong. It's going to do a lot for the share price, right?
I would think so. I quite like this buyback for what it was painted out to be anyway. I thought it was probably the surest way that they could do something to reward their shareholders and boost their shareholders going forward, because I see a lot of their kind of capex stuff that you were referring to from other companies, Paul, as quite speculative. I don't know exactly what they've done this quarter because the earnings haven't come out yet and the report hasn't happened, but I looked back a quarter at the October release, and what I was seeing there was sort of smallish stuff, some carbon capture operation going on, which kind of counts in the sort of greening kind of space, I guess, but mostly what I saw them doing was kind of sticking with what they know here. And while this is a kind of hot and fashionable thing, buying back stock, yes, at a highish price, but they kind of have the cash lying around at the moment, and I'm not sure there's a better use for them for it. So thinking about sort of Chevron and thinking about the sort of general way that companies grow, it looks to me like there's sort of five main ways that companies grow, right? They're either revenue goes up, margins get bigger, you buy back stock, you pay a bigger dividend, or your some multiple price earnings, multiple price sales, multiple whatever it is goes up. And in the case of Chevron, I'm not sure that I see huge amounts of that happening over the very long term in most cases. So revenue, if you look at them, they tend to go up and down a little bit, right? They're mostly driven by the price of oil because they're an integrated oil company, so they do both the upstream and the downstream bit, i.e. the pulling it out of the ground and shoving it in a pipe bit, and turning it into jet fuel and diesel and gasoline and stuff like that bit. But they are pretty much, when I looked at their last report, about 85% of their earnings comes from the upstream bit, so the finding the oil bit and the getting it out of the ground bit, and about 15% comes from the breaking it up into products that kind of finished products, if you like, bit. So that means what they want is higher prices for oil. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure where I see those going at the moment. It feels like recently they've had a big run on these kind of things, and I guess that will have given them a load of extra cash. Buying back stock there looks to me like, and they have pushed a dividend up as well, in fairness to them, it looks to me like buying back stock and pushing up the dividend is going to be the way that this company adds value for its shareholders rather than steady revenue growth or margin expansion. They're trading at a price-earnings ratio of 10-ish when I looked earlier today, although obviously that stock is up because I looked before the open. I sort of think that's probably the most intelligent thing they can do for them for the time being.
I just piqued my interest, Paul, when you said I don't know if they do any other kind of investment. It doesn't look like they do an awful lot of green energy themselves, but they've got a couple of future energy funds. One was launched in 2018, which has 20 companies in it, and they've just launched a second one, which is called Future Energy Fund 2. They launched that in early 2021. I wonder how much they spent on that branding. But it looks like it's got low carbon technology. So a couple of in here that you probably might have heard of is
carbon capture. Capture would be
Carbon Clean,
one,
which is the one that jumped out to me. It's Charge Point, Zap Energy. And then there's a few here in IT and digitalisation, which I must admit there's none of these that are particularly jumping out at me. And then they've got a little oil and gas and sort of exploratory portfolio in here as well. So pretty interesting. They're even doing incubations also for young sort of carbon capture or green energy companies. They can come and work in a part of Chevron, use the facilities, and obviously for free, obviously, while they help develop their ideas. So it looks like Chevron are having a good. I realise at the end of this they've branded themselves as the human energy company, which must drive Greenpeace absolutely wild. But it looks like rather than do it it's the 10-cent way, isn't it? Rather than do it themselves, they'll just take a chunk of everybody and let them sort it. Which I think that probably is my favourite way of people doing things, because I think you end up with sort of like Shell trying to repurpose petrol stations into charging points, and you think, I don't know if this is going to work or not, because it takes me half an hour to charge my car, and I don't want to spend that in a Shell.
Yeah, it's an interesting way. But can you imagine a $78 billion dividend, just like a special dividend?
That's your wet dream, isn't it, Paul?
It'd just be like how much it would send the stock price down as well. It's just ridiculous. It'd be so funny.